Well, anything new you bring in is going to be highly sophisticated equipment, right? It's going to have technology in regards to operating systems and applications and firmware and networks. But we don't necessarily find a lot of cybersecurity wrapped up in that new stuff, right? We always see the safety, the physical safety is usually always being improved upon, but not the cyber side. That's missing in my book.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode. Hi, my name is LuRae Lumpkin, and I am the producer of the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. And today I'm joined by Dino Busalachi, an expert in the field who's going to join me to talk about the World Economic Forum recent 2026 Global Cybersecurity Outlook report. Welcome, Dino.
Hi, LuRae. How you doing?
Good. Excited to be talking with you about this. You have got so much experience having walked and lived this, walked the field, walked the trenches.
Still doing it.
And so I thought we'll start off with some of the topics that were prevalent in that global report, which is they talked to over almost 1,000 people, CEOs, CIOs, CISOs. What are you seeing as far as the cyber resilience and what's happening out in the field still today?
I think the majority and the bulk of the funding and the resources and cybersecurity, if you want to talk about that, is still wrapped up in the enterprise and the IT space per se. The very large companies, which probably many of them would have attended an event like the World Economic Forum, are started programs with how to deal with their OT cybersecurity, but it's been very limited. You know, the reach has not been to the depth of what they should be chasing within their manufacturing environment. And some of them might sit and think, well, because I got technology that's out there that's, decades old, it's not connected. And so they may view that as not being a risk outside just because of the nature and the age of that stuff. But on the flip side of that, we don't typically find that's the case. There's most of that equipment is connected, and it's connected for various reasons, right? One is just simple support. Right? You got two choices. You can either wait for somebody to fly to your site and go out there and connect into that machine center and try to solve whatever problem or add whatever enhancements you're looking to have made, or they got a remote in. So they are connected, right? And we see various different types of technologies that are deployed inside these manufacturing environments to let these OEMs and system integrators gain access. So to sit and think that it's not connected is not true, right? And so, and then there's the other thing is the enterprise, the business is also after a lot of the data, as are the OEMs and system integrators responsible for maintaining and supporting that equipment want access to that data too, maybe to improve their maintenance windows, make improvements upon the machine itself, improve its safety, improve its operation, its functionality. And so there's constant communication going on at some point with that equipment. It is not disconnected, and then, if you want to talk about emerging technologies, well, anything new you bring in is going to be highly sophisticated equipment, right? It's going to have technology in regards to operating systems and applications and firmware and networks. But we don't necessarily find a lot of cybersecurity wrapped up in that new stuff, right? We always see the safety, the physical safety is usually always being improved upon, but not the cyber side. That's missing in my book. So, and I think it's because of how they spend their money. We got capital, CapEx, you got OpEx, which is usually where the IT folks live and breathe. That's how they get funded to get the money that they do. The OT side is generally CapEx driven, right? And we do have some OpEx money, but that OpEx money doesn't have cybersecurity line items in the budget for that, because it's pulled all the way back, thinking that IT is dealing with it, and the fact that they're either not doing it or they're doing it in a very limited fashion.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. One of the interesting things was how AI is getting so much attention, and it was like 94% of the people in the survey said that was like one of the biggest concerns. And I think the flip side of that, the bad actors also using AI. I'm curious what you're seeing or what your perspective on AI from kind of both angles would be.
Well, From an AI perspective, if you get enough folks that start really focusing on industrial control systems in regards to AI, it's going to be a catastrophic problem, in my view. Meaning that right now, most of the attacks that happen come through the IT ranks. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody walking into a plant floor, because we've seen this too, an engineer walking into a plant floor with their laptop and plugs it into the environment, has something in it that gets out into the environment and it makes its way around through the business, right? So it can happen at the IT or the OT level, and it does. A lot of times, though, it's coming in through the IT, ranks to be able to drop these payloads in, right? If that's the intent. I think with AI, people are going to start being able to use AI as a way to determine, well, how can I cripple a control system? Right. And when you have control systems that haven't been patched in years, have hundreds of vulnerabilities and risks associated with them. And we find this every single day, right? Which is different with IT, because IT patches on a pretty consistent basis, right? That's why you see Patch Tuesday. They're constantly patching and updating on their side. It doesn't happen on the plant floor. And we go in there and do our visibility studies, assessments, if you will, and we're looking at those risks and looking at the thousands of vulnerabilities that we find in just one plant, right? Thousands of them, things that have been patched in a decade, from your PLCs, your network switches, your HMIs that are running Windows operating systems, your application servers in a lot of cases, the robots that are out there, they've not been touched. And they'll have vulnerabilities that are pretty significant. And if AI is ever leveraged to go, to create remote code execution or something that can denial of service attacks, or, something that can mess with the memory on a control system, it's going to be bad days for folks if it gets to that level that AI is driving that.
Yeah. And I know that the other thing I've seen and read some about is AI now being put in the solutions for the companies who are trying to alleviate cyber events from happening. But the risk I could see happening, and maybe you've seen some of this already, is people relying too much on, AI's in this new solution we just put in place, so it's going to catch everything. But you still need a human, right?
In the loop, right? That's what we call it, and to your point, when it comes to that, anything that can have a kinetic change, ideally you want a human in the loop to be able to determine whether that needs to be allowed to happen or not, right? And right now, when you don't have visibility into the assets that you have, nor have a good understanding of what the risks are with those assets based on the current operating system or firmware version that they're running, or what remote access actually looks like, and you're kind of wide open, and how do you put a score on that, right? In the enterprise, they probably do. I got to believe that there's metrics and targets that are presented to the leadership of the company of all the things that they're doing to trying to close these doors, all the things they're trying to do to thwart these attacks, all these denial of service attacks, anything that's coming at them, all the things that they're doing to shield from it. What are you doing on the plant floor? And it's like crickets, because if anybody says they're doing anything, my next question would be, well, let's talk to the OEMs and system integrators that are working in your plant today and see who's giving them targets on how to help solve some of these problems. And I know what the answer is going to be. It's going to be zero.
Right.
Because I work in that space, and I don't have CISOs and CIOs or security people calling us up about what we're doing inside their manufacturing environment, and whether we're designing and building and deploying equipment, or maintaining and supporting the equipment that they have today and gaining access to that environment.
Well, it's interesting, because that's a good segue into one of the other topics that emerged as one of the bigger concerns. Almost half of them, 46%, are concerned about third-party and supply chain vulnerabilities. I think with what's happening with other countries getting parts and buying things.
Materials. That's right. What are they doing? And we went through this exercise in Y2K. Right, where not only did you have to determine that you were going to be able to operate on January 1st of 2000, but the people who supply you with goods and or services, are they prepared for Y2K, right? And there was, evaluations and assessments that were done to make sure that when that clock turned over to January 1, 2000, that you were still able to run your applications, able to run your systems, were able to run me working in a very large adult beverage manufacturing environment to make sure we were still making beer. So, but yeah, to your point, that supply chain, Same thing I'm saying about the OEMs and system integrators. They're not really looking to see what chemicals, what raw goods that are supplying them to make whatever product that they're making, whether they're going to be able to continue to do so because they're
Right.
doing best practices in regards
Right.
to cybersecurity in their industrial control system and automation environment.
Yeah. So I think that the lack of supply chain visibility, that was also one of the, top concerns of even knowing where's everything coming from, and is it even secure, the parts that they're getting and putting into the plant floor. So I
Right.
don't know what
Well,
you're
to make sure that you
saying.
can still get the goods you need to be able to make the goods you're supplying to your end customer, right?
Right.
There's no metric out there. There's nothing that's being looked at to say, do you do incident response? What kind of cybersecurity technology are you using in your plant floor today? And what does that look like? How would we score you on that based on, on a
Right.
scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst? Are you a 1 or a 2, or are you a 9 or a 10?
Right.
And I can tell you where most manufacturers are going to fall, and it's going to be less than 5.
Right. Right.
Well, if one's depending on the scale, right? So if 10 being the best, they're going to be less than 5
Right.
most.
Right. Right.
Right.
Well, and I think it's the other thing I think of is also like secure remote access, going back to even like the COVID days where, people, it was more difficult to go out into the plants. But even now, what companies are buying products, they're still buying products from other countries where if you want the warranty to be in place, you need to give them access to your plant floor. But how do you manage that in a safe way?
It depends on the vertical, depends on the organization. Some not very well, because we talked to a lot of IT folks that have recognized that there's a lot of variable ways to get onto that plant floor to provide support. And on average, we find a handful, in a medium-sized manufacturer, medium-sized meaning, 500,000 square feet, maybe generating, a couple hundred million to $1 billion worth of revenue a year at that plant, that they will have several different remote access technologies deployed within their manufacturing environment. Some they're aware of, some they're not. Even in the ones that they're aware of, once that connectivity has been provided, they don't know what goes on once they get in there to do
Right.
whatever it is they're being asked to do, right?
Right.
In a lot of cases, you're still finding large layer 2 flat networks on the control system side. So
Mm.
if you're being tasked with working on my filler on line 7, and we provide you access to that, and you land on that control system network for that, all of a sudden you can see not only that filler, but the entire packaging line for that filler and the other packaging lines. And oh, by the way, you can get to utilities, or you can get to mixing and blending, because they're all sitting on the layer 2
Right.
network. Now, IT has done a good enough job in recognizing the segmentation is lax in that
Mhm.
environment, right? But the problem for them is, well, how do I design and build a network for control systems that I don't have any knowledge of? I don't understand how it's supposed to work, what's supposed to communicate with what. I don't know what the applications are. And so what they do is they just try to build a wall between them and IT and OT. The whole IT OT
Right.
convergence
Right.
conversation turns into an IT OT kind of a blockade, if you
Right.
will, where IT is just trying to protect themselves from the OT side of
Right.
the house. And whatever happens down there on the OT side is not their problem.
There was another point made that was a concern of overdependence on certain critical suppliers. So, what's your take on, I know there's a mix and match of what companies decide to put on the plant floor, whether it's to make the goods or to secure the goods or,
Well, it's very decentralized, comparing it to an IT strategy where you would centralize everything, standardize, on equipment and technology. The plant floor, not so much.
Mhm.
Now, they buy equipment potentially from all over the world that are built and designed by organizations that are all over the world. And I've never, and I've been in, if I've been in 1,000 plants, I've been in almost 2,000 plants in almost 4 decades. Nobody's got the same singular homogeneous automation technology product in a
Right.
plant. There's usually a
Mhm.
handful. Just like
Mhm.
there's a handful of remote access technologies, there's a handful of
Right.
automation vendors, and there Rockwell, Siemens, Emerson, Schneider, GE, Mitsubishi, Yogawa, stuff that's proprietary made out of Italy or Switzerland or Germany, South America that just comes in and
Wow.
whatever they bolted together, to make this machine do whatever it needs to do,
Right. Right. Well, I know another area that was highlighted was the lack of cybersecurity skills and expertise on the plant floor and in the organizations to be able to even do cybersecurity effectively. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, there's not a lot about it. We've had to grow ours, right? I mean, generally speaking, we had to get people, we've been cutting them right out of school. Most of them have industrial backgrounds, meaning they're electrical engineers, chemical engineers, process guys, and some IT people, and getting them into the manufacturing environment, meaning that
Right.
part of their job is working in the plants, right? As
Mhm.
far as their day-to-day work, the technologies they work with, outside of just doing the analysis and designing and deployment, part of their job is to work in the field. We find a lot of IT organizations, they don't like to spend a lot of time on the plant floor. In a lot of cases, they've never been to their company's plant floor, working on it specifically, or if they have, they haven't been there in a year or two. Maybe they go every other year. So finding the skill sets, because the schools aren't teaching it, right? They're not
Right.
teaching industrial cybersecurity per se. I mean, I
Mhm.
haven't seen many programs. There might be a few out there now, but there's not been a
Right.
plethora of them that are putting, thousands of students that
Mhm.
are coming out into the workforce with a background with industrial cybersecurity. There's just not a
Mhm.
lot of them out there. Our clients don't even have them, right?
Right.
They're
Right.
trying to get people and, put the round peg in the square hole. It's like, well, Joe's got an industrial background. He's been working on the plant floor and some of the computers. And, Susie over here has been working in the IT stuff on the network. Let's see if we can't get those two together to go figure this out.
Right.
Okay, you got two people, but you got 50 plants.
Right.
Right. Tell me how you scale that.
Right.
Right. Is that
Exactly.
something you want to do in the next decade? Are you looking at
Right.
20 years? Are you looking at growing a practice? It could
Right.
literally cost you, $10 million to grow a practice to be able to have the skill sets and the resources you need to go do this. That's why a lot of IT organizations outsource. Why do they outsource? Because they don't want to try to chase and
Exactly.
find and keep talent that got high technical skilled individuals and try to keep them happy and have them work for a dog food company or for a
Right.
brewery. I mean, why would they? What are you going to
Right.
get with that?
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
For a couple of years, and they realize that they're much more marketable working for an organization that does this every day, all day, and they can make a heck of a lot more money doing that than they can working
Yeah.
in some field in Iowa that's running a food plant. You
Right.
know,
Right. Which is why, yeah, I think you are, such a great solution for so many companies because you've got the expertise, you live and breathe it every day, and you're not just fitting it in with, 50 other things in your day, which is typically what's happening, I think, out on the plant floor. It's like they've got other priorities, and this is just one more thing on the to-do list.
again, it's following the IT model for
Right.
services. Right.
Right.
What's the most effective, efficient way to get something that I need that's beneficial to my business? But it's not my core competency. I'm not an
Yeah.
IT shop,
Yeah.
And even companies that have large IT organizations, I've seen that pendulum shift, depending on which CIO and the board changes that are made or chairman, CEO,
Mhm.
and they want to outsource everything. And then they move everything to
Right.
the other side of the equation for several years. And it's like,
Right.
else comes in, they come move it back in. Or there's a blend sometimes
Right.
between, your own professional IT group and your services organization that are there to help you.
Right. Well, I know
It's
we were,
easier to manage a contract some cases than it is trying to hire a bunch of highly skilled individuals. And,
right.
and this stuff here is just that because you got equipment that's been out there for a couple of decades, number
Right.
one. And the technology is not even very well understood. You take a company like Rockwell, and look at some of these foundation field bus networks, as we used to call them, the data highways and the control net networks. And it's hard. And there's still a lot of that stuff out there. But
Right.
it's becoming very hard to find people that know how to work with that technology. Because if you're what Rockwell will tell you is like, yeah, you need to get rid of that. And it might cost
Right.
you a few $1 million to do that. But that's what their position is. You need to get rid of that stuff. We're not taking
Yeah.
care of it anymore. We're not supporting it anymore. We're not making cards for it anymore. You should get rid
Right.
of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know one of the other things highlighted, which really was a surprise, like surprised me, as long as this has been now become such a visible to us, it's visible anyway, that there's a need to do something, to be proactive. Don't just wait until you're a victim. That only 27% simulate cyber incidents or conduct recovery exercises. Like where they were doing tabletop exercises, only 27% do that. What's your take on companies who've never done like
Yeah,
a
well, I don't
tabletop?
believe that number, at least not to the extent that it's making its way down to the plant.
Right.
All right, because we don't get involved with those types of activities, because if they were, we'd be doing that.
Right.
I'm coming out to your plant, and I've been working there for several years and been working and doing tens of millions of dollars worth of automation work. I know, but we're not sitting down going through some IR plan that they put together,
Right.
as part of that. They're not
Right.
asking us to participate in it, or, help them put something together, or to, add that into our contract for IR. They're not, none of them's doing it. So whatever they're doing at whatever level they're doing at it, they're definitely not doing it at the plant level.
No, no. Well, I
You know,
think that that's almost the point. Only one in four. So that's like three-fourths of them aren't doing anything. The other point was that only a third are mapping their supply chain ecosystem. So that they
well,
don't even have that mapped out.
yeah, and even if they're working with a plant, they're just doing it cloak and dagger, meaning that they're doing it as just an internal exercise. It's not including their supply chain or
Right.
their OT ecosystem that's a part of the activity to go inside that plant, day in and day
Right.
out every day, right? Because we don't see them. If I'm
Like,
talking to our client facing partners
right.
and directors who are working out there, and you start asking those questions, like, yeah, we never get, and it's not in the RFPs. It's
Right.
not part of the weekly calls on support. It's not on any strategy. You've got a shutdown coming up, next month. Here's what we're going to be doing.
Right.
We're going to add an IR plan, activity in there. I mean, that stuff doesn't exist,
Right. Right.
you know? And we work in, 25 or 30,
Right.
35% of the largest manufacturers in the United States.
It seems like until someone gets hit, it doesn't become a priority. Then they're in recovery mode. Like so we talked about the Jaguar Land Rover, that was highlighted in the report, the
Yeah.
impact of that.
Yeah. It impacted the country's GDP, right?
Exactly.
Right. And then we've seen big hits to large manufacturers here. And most of them just try to sweep it under the rug, keep it as
Right.
quiet as possible, you know,
Right.
try to minimize the noise to the fact that they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars, if not a billion or two, depending on how big they are and how
Right.
far and wide this thing got, and just live through it and say, "Oh, if it happens again in 10 years, we'll call it a win, I guess."
Well, it was interesting. There was even a conflict in priorities, even between what the CEOs had as the number one concern that they had versus the CISO. The CEOs worried about like cyber fraud and things happening with data, and then the CISOs concerned with ransomware, and so that's their focus. And it's like the OT cybersecurity seems like just fall right through the cracks in their priorities. I don't know, what is your experience with that and getting the attention of either the CEO or the CISO to make this a priority?
One, you don't have the skill sets you need within the OT organization on the client side to be able to drive this narrative above and beyond what IT has been doing for the last 20 years. And at the same time, when it comes to OT, all the decision making when it comes to the technologies that are chosen to be inside these plants, 90+% of the time, it's being decided purely by an OT group, right? Again,
Hmm.
CapEx. I don't think that the CISOs and the CIOs, I've tell me, I don't want to be the SCADA cop. I want to keep IT and OT separated. And if that's their position, that's fine. That's okay. But somebody needs to be leading the OT charge of this. And that's where it's fallen down, right? Because you don't have the skill set within the OT environment to wrangle this in and try to get your arms around it, right? Build a budget,
Hmm.
look at your partner supply chain ecosystem to find out who are the capable organizations that can really help me with this, and start building and moving down your own path.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean that IT can't participate. Like I always say, you want them in the huddle, right? You want them on the field.
Right.
You just can't be the quarterback.
Right.
You
Right.
know, and I'm sure there's some IT executives out there that listen to me say that. Well, that's a bunch of bull, and it's like, well, then pick up the phone and talk to your top SIs and OEMs out there and start building a bridge to find out what they're doing inside your environment.
Right.
Do you see how you can improve that cybersecurity posture? Because if you're not doing that, then I'm not full of it. You are.
Oh, well, any other final thoughts that you have on all of these topics or what you've seen work successfully for someone trying to run the football down the field that's worked well?
I use the term, you got to get all liars in the same room, right? And
Mhm.
that's one of those where you got to get the IT leadership, the OT leadership, and their trusted partners in the room to figure out where are we and where do we want to go. You know,
Yeah.
and a lot of them do it. They some of them, they're working with the high dollar consulting organizations. They'll sit down with and get a nice flowery report that they spent $500,000 for, telling you what you should do,
Right.
not how to do it, not how to
Mhm.
get there, but what you should be doing, right?
Right.
And that's what that's what they'll get put in front of the board, in front of the chairman of the company, the CEO, and say, "Yep, here's what we need to do, and what's it going to cost?" And that's that's where they don't really know what it's going to cost. They have
Mhm.
no idea because they don't even have a really good asset inventory. Number one,
Right.
number two, they don't know what the risk and vulnerabilities are associated with those assets they have out there to determine how do I prioritize which ones I want to do this year versus next year versus 5 years,
Right.
right? And then pare down the micro segmentation of the network, which requires that you're going to have to get the OT community involved. If you're going to start making changes to the comms paths around control systems, yeah,
Mhm.
you need to work with controls people to do that. That's
Mhm.
not like something an IT person come in and do independently.
Right.
They have to
Right.
work with those engineers that understand those applications of those machines to be able to determine what paths and comms make sense versus which ones don't.
Right. Well, and I know I've seen you from the outside. I've not been in the trenches with you, but where one plant steps up, you go out and do one plant to give them an idea and a sense for what's happening, what does it look like, where are they vulnerable, and that can open the door for them to realize, wow, we are exposed. If we're exposed here, what do the other plants look like?
Yeah. Well, and you have to almost get your mind wrapped around the same way you pay for insurance, right? If
Hmm.
you spend $5 million a year for insurance, and you may never have to use it, but it's there
Right.
for a reason. Why wouldn't you spend $1 million or, for a couple of plants to be able to prevent things that can cause that $5 million insurance policy to have to be used, right?
Right.
Because a lot of them depend on that. It's like, well, we got insurance, that's how we'll get our money back. Remember, that's just to pay for remediation.
Right.
That doesn't pay for the business loss of operational loss of your plants being down for a week to a month.
Right.
That's just money that's gone.
Yeah. Let alone, as
Yeah.
I always say, the brand impact, the consumer impact. If it gets out in the press,
Mhm.
it can affect stock price. Just we saw with the Jaguar Land Rover.
Right. We've seen that where the manufacturers have lost shelf space because they couldn't put goods out there.
Right.
Shelf space was given to a competitor.
Yeah. So I would just say anyone who hasn't done something, I mean, this World Economic Forum report reinforced to me for sure that there's such a need out there and people
Mhm.
still aren't taking as proactive action as much as they should to protect themselves, their organization, their employees, the people in the community, all the potential impacts.
Yeah. But it's almost either like growing a CIO or a CISO, the question becomes you can either have your own for the OT side, right? And that way you end up with two. You have one for
Hmm.
the IT and one for the OT.
Hmm.
Or you're going to have to get somebody that comes from the OT world and have them become that CIO for the organization, right? So that way
Hmm.
they're looking back at it from this is where we generate our revenue,
Hmm.
right? And I'm coming at it from a manufacturing experience with the technologies we use there. And I need to see how I can map as closely as I can in budget and resource,
Right.
right? Leverage resources that I don't have internally, or I find
Hmm.
partners to come help where we see fit. I mean, every single client we go into, I haven't yet to meet a manufacturer that's taken one of these cybersecurity solution sets and ran with it well.
Mm.
You know,
Right.
I just haven't. And I've
Yeah.
seen hundreds over the
Yeah.
last 10 years. It's just not the case. It's because of that disconnect between IT and OT. I keep going back to that.
Right.
Again, I'm not saying it's right, but that's just the nature of the world. It's like oil and water, night and day.
Right. Right. Right.
They're very different organizations with very different charters and priorities, and trying to make this work to get the OT world to be as sufficient and as capable as the IT world. How are you going to do that?
Right.
I'm all ears. Explain it to me.
Right.
Because the only way I see it right now is they have to work with their supply chain, their ecosystem, with people who understand that equipment and how it works and why it operates the way it does.
Right. Yeah.
Be able to wrap things around it to protect it, right?
Yeah, because I mean, I even think, as you've said many times, people can make the investment, so the IT can buy something, they check the box, they tell the board, yes, we have this in place, and it's shelfware. It's not even fully utilized or operationalized to do what it's meant to do. So they still get attacked.
And when they get attacked, the question is, what's been impacted, right? In most cases, everybody sees it through the lens of my business systems and Windows environment is the one that's being disrupted. Yeah, but so is your plant. They're just not putting it in that bucket because it has Windows operating systems and it has networks in it, and it's also impacted. But you're lumping it in with your IT stuff, even though IT has little to nothing to do with a lot of those Windows machines on your plant floor that have been out there for 10 years.
Right. Well, this is a great report. If anyone out there hasn't taken a look at it, definitely I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And thank you so much, Dino. You're always a wealth of knowledge. For anyone out there wanting to get up to speed, I would reach out to you in a heartbeat.
Thanks, LuRae.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.